The 508th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony, we're back with you guys once again today here on a Thursday morning, the day after Carolina blew out NC State at home 97-73 last night, and we're here to talk about it. I am not on camera. We're at work. The studio I am recording out of does not have a camera, but you will get blessed with the face of my co-host, Anthony Pagnotta, while we are here live. We wanted to go live because, A, we told you we were going live to talk about the game. And then we, you know, with the snow day and all the stuff that's going on, we figured a lot of people would still be at home. So I figured, well, we could still be live and it would not be the biggest deal. So we're here to talk about Carolina's win last night over the NC State Wolfpack. As I mentioned, Carolina blew out State 97-73 to improve to 16-11 on the year. They're now 9-6 in the ACC. Carolina never trailed in this game. They led from start to finish. That's now back-to-back games that Carolina has never trailed in. The win at Syracuse over the weekend, and here most recently last night against the Wolfpack. The win continued Carolina's dominance over the rival from Raleigh. They are now 40-7 against NC State over the last 22 seasons. They are 32-7 all-time against NC State in the Smith Center, and they improved to 168-81 all-time against NC State. The 168 wins are the most against a single opponent in program history. R.J. Davis was one of 4 Carolina players to score in double figures. He led UNC with 21 points as he became the ACC's number 4 all-time leading scorer as he passed multiple ACC legends in the game last night. All in all, Carolina shot 57% from the field, 40% from three, and what I'm considering the most complete offensive performance of the season against a power conference opponent. We've seen Carolina play at a high level, against whether it was American or Campbell, and some other, non-conference games against, mid-major competition. But for my money, that's the best we've seen Carolina play offensively against a power conference team this year. And you could argue it was their most complete performance of the year altogether, with the way that they defended, the way that they competed from start to finish as they secured another regular season sweep of the Wolfpack, something that has now happened 15 times in the last 21 years.
Yeah, I think it is the most complete performance that we've seen from this group, because you look at both ends of the floor, Carolina just dominant. The moments that State would go on any sort of run, it was because Carolina was simply in control of the game. And those things happen, especially in the second half. But that first half, what an amazing job Carolina did in that first half of forcing State into a ton of different mistakes. I mean, the best part about that first half, you go back and you look, man, State turned the ball over 9 times in that first half. That is their season average for the year. They do a really good job of holding on to the basketball. And we said that was going to be one of the keys for Carolina, was making sure that you took care of the basketball in this game. Because of that, Carolina dominated. There was nobody that was really able to get off to a hot start. Those issues that Carolina had on the offensive glass the first time around, they weren't there. They out-rebounded State in the first half, 21-12, including 8 offensive rebounds for themselves, 3 of them by Drake Powell. So it was just an all-around effort from these guys, and the hustle plays that Carolina needed to make. We talked about coming into the game that Carolina needed to do what they did against Syracuse. They needed to make those little, or achieve those little things that they did against Syracuse that Hubert Davis pointed to and talked about were so key. And that's exactly what they did in this game from start to finish. State never had a chance in this one. And I think it's just amazing that Carolina, and we were thinking to ourselves, there's no way that this group's going to be able to put together a complete performance, because we just have not seen it from them. And who knows, maybe you look back on that Syracuse game and that is the turning point of the season. Not sure, but this team looked like they just came out with a different attitude. They were playing as free as they have the entire season. And what a difference it makes when you take the pressure off of yourself and just play the game you know that you're capable of playing.
I tweeted it at halftime, and I should have went back and followed up with it after the final horn. The first 20 minutes of the game was Carolina basketball. Carolina built a 54-26 lead. The 40 minutes of the game was Carolina basketball. And that's really, for the first time, we can sit here and say that from start to finish, they looked like and played a brand of basketball that we're used to seeing as Carolina fans. We've seen it in spurts. We've seen it, in different moments, whether it was, the come from behind win over Dayton and the Maui Invitational, the comeback against UCLA in the CBS Sports Classic, whether it was the comeback against Florida that ultimately fell short in the Jumpman Invitational, but we never saw it be sustained. And I thought that was one thing that Carolina did last night, was that from start to finish, it was a sustained effort, energy, and intensity, to the point where when Carolina went to I think it was the first media timeout of the second half, mind you, they're holding a 24-point lead. The game is effectively over. This State team, not a good enough team to crawl back from that big of a deficit, let alone on the road in a rowdy Smith Center crowd, which we'll touch on here in just a second. And Hubert Davis was as animated as any, as we've seen him all year long, while they're up 24, because he did not like the way that they came out. And I think they were still competing, but they weren't executing. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of like, it felt a lot like last year's Hubert Davis, right? Where it didn't matter if Carolina was up 10 or down 10, man, he was coaching and he was really challenging his guys. And I felt like that was what you saw last night from start to finish. We have seen it where it's different for him in these rivalry games. You do see a different emotion from the head coach of the Tar Heels, but I still thought with them to be up 24 and for him to be that outwardly displeased with the way they had come out to start the second half, I think speaks volumes about where I think he is and where this team is, because they know what's on what's on the line. They know what they got to do if they want to put on their dancing shoes in March. And everything right now is about building towards that. It's about progressing towards playing a style of basketball that can win you the type of games you've got to win to get into the tournament and then try to make some damage. So, and Saturday, because Syracuse was able to come back and make many runs, I think it was a lot harder to say that was a complete effort. But, man, Carolina controlled that game from start to finish. They controlled this game from start to finish. And it really does make you wonder, how much did the type of crowd that they played in front of really help? Because it was noted during the broadcast many times Of course, a lot of you are probably at home today because of the weather that was in the area, whether it's here in Charlotte or up there in the Triangle. Man, Carolina announced in mid-afternoon that they were just, pulling the tickets and just saying, if you can get here, we'll let you in for free. First come, first come seating. But encouraged, only make the game if you can walk. Like if you have to drive, then it's obviously not worth the risk, and rightfully so. What that turned into was a lot of students filled the lower bowl, and and it provided as legitimate a home court advantage that Carolina has played in front of all year long. We know the Duke game is coming up. That'll be the best environment that they play in the season, as it is every year. But it kind of just reminded us of what it could be if and when Carolina does build a new arena. If they do what a lot of places do, where they give the students the priority seating, like I think the environment for it not to be a filled arena, there was about 15,000 people there, but you could tell that Carolina responded to the energy that was created in the building, and they fed off of that. And I think it was just maybe a nice reminder for why people are on the fence about Carolina building a new arena, pooling those old licenses. There are benefits to when Carolina eventually does something new with their basketball facility, because they could create a more legitimate home court environment.
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. And this game is going to be used as one of the reasons why they should ultimately go to, a different seating arrangement inside of the Smith Center if they rebuild it, or if they decide to move to a new location. And that's why, some of the people that are freaking out about it and saying that, the new location is all bad, this is what's going to ruin Carolina basketball, all that kind of stuff. I mean, look, I understand why you feel a certain way about it. I mean, believe me, I don't love the idea either. But from an environment standpoint, I think that just about everybody should be on board with this, because last night showed you that when you surround that part of the arena with students, it's going to make it incredibly difficult for teams to be able to concentrate. I mean, that was as loud as we've heard that building really all season long. You mentioned that the second best, it's probably going to be the second best environment no matter what to the Duke game environment. Yeah, that's definitely true. But this one, I mean, you could feel like it was just something different. And so I think that Carolina, as a whole, they got to take a serious look at that. And that has to be a big part of what they're trying to do with whatever their next plan is. But in terms of the effect that it had on the game, I mean, yeah, I think, when NC State clearly looked rattled by it. It was not something that they've, had to face before in Chapel Hill. Now, a lot of the guys on the roster maybe weren't, on the team last year, didn't take the trip to Chapel Hill. But for the guys that did, I think it was probably a little bit of a culture shock that, oh, man, this is a different environment. It's much more rowdy in here than it has been. So, I thought the team really did a great job of feeding off of that. You could see just the energy that they had, after the dunk or the finish inside through the contact, and eventually goes to the line and finishes the N1 for Seth Trimble, yelling in the face of Dontrez Styles. And, maybe that ends up happening even if you have the regular crowd there, but it feels like with the students there, with kids that are around their age that are yelling and screaming, it feels like that energy sort of translated to the players. And that's the thing, man. Who knows? Maybe we need a couple more snow days here before the end of the year. Maybe we need more games like this to close out the season, because it definitely felt like this was an energy from the Tar Heels that we haven't necessarily seen so far this year.
And make no mistake about it, Hubert Davis is aware of what came out. Was it last week about the updated findings as they search for a new basketball home and facility? He made it known that one of the things he loves about where the Smith Center is that it can be, yes, it could be a long walk depending on where you're coming from, but it was generally accessible for students last night. And he's like, they were able to walk down the hill and come support their classmates, and it helped create the best environment Carolina has played in front of so far this season. Let's now get into the box score, and gosh knows it's a pretty one for Carolina. They shot 57% from the field. They were 35 of 61. State got up to 46%, but they only shot 36% in the first half. Carolina stayed hot from the outside, 8 of 20 from behind the three-point line. That equates to 40% shooting. NC State, on the other hand, just 8 of 24 from behind the three-point line. Carolina efficient and effective from the foul line. They were 19 of 24 from the stripe. That's 79%. NC State, on the other hand, 11 of 16, 69%. Carolina +8 in that category. Carolina did have 11 turnovers that led to 16 points for the Wolfpack, but they forced 10 turnovers and scored 15 points off of them to really make that a nothing burger. You mentioned the rebounding. Carolina 40-21 rebounding margin, 26-14 on the defensive glass, 14-7 on the offensive glass. That was a big part of their offense early on. They scored 21 second chance points compared to just 13 for NC State. Bench points, because of a new starting line, which we'll talk about here momentarily, 43 bench points for Carolina, 26 for the Wolfpack. Points in the paint in favor of Carolina, 52-26. Both teams had 14 fast break points. The Heels had 17 assists on 35 made baskets. How about this, though? This tells you how much Carolina was dialed in defensively. Just 6 assists for NC State on their 27 made baskets. They had to basically earn everything that they got individually. The game was tied one time. There were no lead changes. All in all, Carolina led for 38 minutes and 4 seconds. The second chance points, 21-13 in favor of Carolina. The thing that stands out is Carolina's, I think, 10 of their first 12 points were second chance opportunities. And that's where it comes back to the tone was set. The energy was there right from the get-go. And maybe it's because Carolina was bigger. They had more size and length in their lineup. Who knows? I also thought there was just more of a concerted effort. We're going to get to the glass, and we're going to rebound the way we expect North Carolina basketball to rebound the ball. I mean, to score 21 points off 14 offensive rebounds, highly efficient. Usually Carolina has been averaging 1 point per a 1 second chance point per every offensive rebound they got. That's not good enough. You're not capitalizing on the second chance opportunities, which are killer in today's game. I thought that was as big a reason why as any Carolina was so good offensively in the first half. You can talk about the shots that they did make, but I thought it was their ability to grab their misses and score right at or in front of the rim, something that we've seen over our 15-plus years watching and covering this program, but not what we've seen so far from this year's team.
Well, it takes the pressure off of the guards, when it comes to them having to shoot just unreal percentages from the outside, because we've seen that throughout this year, that there are moments where this team, it just relies so heavily on their guards to be able to knock down shots, or else it's not going to be a successful game. And in this game, it was a little bit different because you've got that presence inside against, an NC State team that, is smaller than a lot of the teams that Carolina is going to face. But again, you go back to that first matchup, it was the other way around, especially early in the first half. NC State was everywhere, pulling down offensive rebounds. And, in this game, it gets off to an ugly start, couple of offensive rebounds for State, and we're like, oh, here we go again. Carolina is going to be going through the same thing that they went through in that first game. That was not the case. When you look at that first half, to have 8 offensive rebounds for yourself is just amazing. And 3 of them coming from Drake Powell. Jalen Washington gets in there for a couple. That's what you want to see, are guys taking advantage of those second chance opportunities. As you said, though, too, look, if you're going to get those second chance opportunities, you've got to be able to finish them. And in the first half, Carolina pulls down 8 offensive rebounds. That turns into 17 points. And that's a big part of why you had the margin that you did at halftime. Because, you look at how Carolina shot. They shot 55.6% overall, but RJ Davis, your best player, was just 4 of 12 in that first half. It was really that everybody was scrapping, getting those loose balls, and finishing those opportunities inside. So, what a great performance from those guys. I thought especially, down low, we saw good performances from Vin Allen Lubin in the second half looked really good. I thought Jalen Washington with 6 points was very effective. Even you go to Jalen Withers, this is the second straight game where I thought he played pretty well. Was nowhere near as good as he was the other night, but we don't need him to be as good as he was the other night. Still, 8 points in this game, 3 of 5 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3. You're going to live with that stat line all the time. And then Drake Powell not scoring a ton, but I thought putting him back into the starting lineup. See, I think that's one of the things that you really love with what you saw from Carolina last night. They go with the bigger lineup, and it results in a much, much better rebounding performance. I mean, they end up with 40 total rebounds, 14 of them offensive rebounds. I mean, they out-rebounded State by 19. That is unreal considering where this team has been rebounding-wise for the majority of the season. So, I mean, yeah, it kind of makes you wonder, and I know that's, what we're going to talk about here. It kind of makes you wonder if this is where Carolina needs to go with their starting 5.
Let's now get into the quote of the game from head coach Hubert Davis. He told the media after the win, this was the most complete game he felt his team has played so far this season.
Well, I thought it was one of our most, if not the most complete game that we played all season. I just, I thought, our energy, our effort, our attention to detail on both ends of the floor was really good. The energy from the bench was sustained or even better. And so I'm really happy about that. And, turning a corner, I don't know, but I know that we played well tonight. I know that our practices over the last week have been very spirited, and it's been the best practices that we've had all season in terms of competitiveness. And we'll do that Thursday and Friday in preparation for a really good Virginia team.
We're going to talk about the whole turning the corner narrative in just a minute. There's no denying, though, that's the best game Carolina has played this year. Because even in, the blowout wins where you ran away from SMU, you blew out California, there were still lulls of energy in those games. There were still lulls where it felt like Carolina just took their foot off the gas because they knew that the game was in hand or what have you. I never got that sense last night. It felt like from the start of the game to the final horn, man, Carolina was in attack mode. And Carolina was out. They were out to eat. And it's like they smelled blood in the water. They knew this State team, would lost 9 out of 10 entering the game, really struggling. And they were just there to where, if you jumped on them, they were probably going to cave in and quit. And that's effectively what happened. Haven't been too many games this year where the game was over at the under 12, under 8-minute mark of the first half. That was the case last night. The game was over. We knew by that point that Carolina was going to go on and get the win. And so, what this team has failed to do, even when they had their 4-game winning streak back in early January, because of the way it was, they never really built momentum. They never really improved from one game to the next. We can sit here and lament how bad Syracuse is. We can sit here and lament how bad NC State is. There's nothing Carolina can do about that. But you can't deny that this looks like a team that is trending in the right direction. It feels like maybe Hubert Davis has finally found the right combination of lineups. He's now pushing the right buttons. And that's what the team did 4 years ago. When Carolina did then what they have to do now, which is basically win out down the stretch. When they went into Duke and beat Duke, man, they built to that moment. It wasn't just something that they just rolled out of their bed and it happened. They played a really good brand of basketball for 2.5, 3 weeks that allowed that result to be what it was. The same thing has to happen now. And kind of like that year, your schedule was oddly in a situation where you had a bunch of winnable games. You just didn't have to screw it up. Well, that's what Carolina has right now until the Duke game. You have a bunch of games that you should win. And as long as you don't screw it up, that game is going to have the type of meaning and the magnitude that you expect the Duke game to have when you meet for the final time in the regular season. Do you agree with Hubert's assessment that's the most complete game this team's played so far this year?
I don't think there's any question that it's the most complete game because just the defensive effort I thought was pretty amazing. The only other game I would maybe take a look at, and I kind of agree with you because I do think that there were points in the game, and maybe it was because it was just closer. But it did feel like against SMU, there were times where SMU was controlling things. Last night, it never felt like that. Even when NC State was scoring, Carolina always found a way, it seemed, to respond on the offensive end. The frustration was that things were starting to get just a little bit too easy for State on the offensive end of the floor for them, defensive end for Carolina. And that's where you saw Hubert Davis start to say, whoa, what are we doing here? Why are we allowing it to be that easy for them? I don't think it was ever, oh, we're being threatened here. And that's when you know you've put together a complete performance. I mean, Carolina was leading by 20 points pretty much the entirety of the second half in this game. That's how much control they had over this one. So, I mean, it's hard not to think this is the most complete performance. And yeah, maybe this is the moment that people are going to point back to. I would say, just based off of what we heard from the locker room, when Hubert Davis told us that, that was one of the first times where guys were really celebrating. They were spraying the water after the game against Syracuse in the locker room. Maybe to me, that's the game that you got to point back to if this thing turns around, because that was the first sign that this team was actually enjoying what was going on and having a little bit of fun. This team has been so tense the entire season because the non-conference schedule that they played was so difficult. They lost some very tough games, especially in Maui. And I think, you look back on those losses, and I think we were very critical of Carolina for the loss. I mean, Auburn, I don't think we were really that critical. I think, honestly, we were even more critical about the fact that Carolina was in such a close game with Dayton in the first game. But, I mean, yeah, Auburn, and then you have what happens against Michigan State. And I'll be the first one to say this. I was very critical of it because I did not think Michigan State was going to be as good as they were or as they are. I mean, that team is probably going to win the Big Ten. They are a really, really good basketball team this year. I just thought they had sort of lost, what made them special under Tom Izzo and that they really wouldn't be able to gain it back. That's a really good basketball team that Carolina got beat by. But I think that loss in particular sort of sent them down a bad path. And from that point forward, things were not as fun as it needed to be. Guys weren't enjoying being out there. Maybe that game against Syracuse and that sign of in the locker room of enjoying that win, maybe that's where the season starts to turn around. And let's hope so. I mean, the thing is you've got to see it, I think, this weekend. Let's see how much different it is this weekend when they play against Virginia. Does it look similar to what we saw in this game against State? Because we've been talking about it all year, man. This team is one team during the week, which, at this point is either they are pretty damn good or they're getting blown out. This team is a whole different team when they play on the weekends. They are a team that wants to play these dramatic games. They get in their own way. The games that shouldn't be dramatic because they jump out to an early lead, they let teams back into the game. So it's important to see what it looks like this weekend. But I will say that today, you should be enjoying that win as much as any win so far this season if you're a Carolina fan. Yeah, it's not the standard. This shouldn't be, we're happy with where Carolina's at right now. All of a sudden, all the things that have happened this year, we're just going to forget about them. But I'm saying take time to enjoy this because that was the first time in a long time this season that you've looked at this Tar Heel team and said that looks like an actual Tar Heel basketball team. That was Carolina basketball, not what we've seen for the majority of this season.
It was the first time all year long I actually smiled while watching this team play and found myself smiling throughout the game. I've got a little family group chat with my brother and my dad. Of course, we're all big Carolina fans, and there's been a lot of negativity this year in the group, mainly by me, which is a big surprise because I'm not a negative person. But I told them last night, I was like, I mean, I was almost beaming with just the way that they played, because for the first time I could identify with what I was seeing. It looked like what it looked like last year and what it felt like last year. And last year's been the only time under Hubert Davis, and really last year was the first time since 2019, and a lot of it in the years in between that were because of a pandemic and all the changes coming to the sport. But like last year was the first time in a handful of years, man, it felt like Carolina basketball. And that team was just a joy to sit down and watch, and you loved them when they were winning, and you were hurting for them when they were losing. And we haven't had that feeling this year. It's been a lot of frustration. And when you're 16-11 at a place like Carolina, that frustration is valid. But I'm big on celebrating winning, because we've seen how hard it can be, even at a place like this. We're gonna celebrate last night, and really just kind of revel in it, because we haven't seen this team play that way, and it's always good beating that team in red, whether they're up like they were up in different times last year, or when they're down like they are this year, which is historically where they've been for the majority of my life. Stat of the game. I went with points in the paint because Carolina doubled state in that category, 52-26. Their rim pressure last night was relentless, and a lot of it, man, was in transition. Like the way that Carolina just got to the front of the rim, off of makes, misses, turnovers it was suffocating almost, where State just couldn't do anything about it. And this is the strength of this team, is playing downhill and getting into the painted area. And you've got guys that can finish through contact, like a Seth Trimble, who had the N1 and he talked trash to Dontrez Styles. Ian Jackson, who has the ability to finish like you have to be able to finish if you want to go play at the NBA level. And so I thought that was a real, as well as Carolina shot the ball from three, I thought that rim pressure was the thing that stood out from the beginning. Those 52 points in the paint back that up, and that's why that gets the stat of the game for me. Let's now get into more thoughts, more takeaways. We do appreciate all of you that are joining us here on the live stream on a Thursday morning, recapping the win over NC State. The first thing we got to talk about, because we haven't really talked about it yet, is the new starting five. And I'll be honest with you, when Carolina sent out the tweet with the new starting five, a big ol' what the bleep came out of my mouth, because I thought it was a mistake. I didn't understand why Drake Powell was starting over Seth Trimble. But that's exactly what happened. Jalen Withers stayed in the starting lineup, so did Van Allen Lubin. That means that RJ Davis and Elliot Cadeau rounded out the starting five. But I can't sit here and say that, it didn't pay off, because those five guys set the tone. And for the first time really all year long, and Carolina is still smaller, but Carolina with that starting five looked like Carolina. Like they looked big. They felt imposing. And I thought more than anything that they did well offensively. They used that to their advantage on the defensive end of the floor with how active they were in the half court. And then once Hubert Davis said, we're going to put the full court press on, and we're going to start, trapping these guys. I mean, it was one turnover after another, one layup after another, and lo and behold, Carolina was running NC State out of the gym. I hear the side of people that say, well, don't you want to build continuity? And Seth Trimble being in the starting lineup, maybe you were getting there. There's something to be said about that. At some point, you got to pick a five and you got to stick with it.
Yep.
But I don't know, with the way they played last night, how do you not start that five moving forward? Because Carolina is bigger, they're longer, they're more versatile, they're more athletic. Also, in the long run, they're deeper. You feel deeper having Ian Jackson come off the bench. You feel deeper having Seth Trimble coming off the bench. You feel deeper having Jalen Washington come off the bench. And that's backed up by the fact that you got 43 points off the bench, and both Trimble and Ian Jackson were in double-figure scoring. What did you think of Hubert Davis's decision to roll out a new starting five? Because it was not something that was hinted at. It was not something that was expected, but you could tell it paid off for Carolina in more ways than one.
Yeah, certainly wasn't a big fan at the start of the game. I thought to myself, why are we changing up a lineup that actually did some pretty decent things the other day against Syracuse? I like the fact that Withers was still in there, but I said, okay, we're putting Drake Powell back in. I don't hate that. Why are we taking Seth Trimble out of the starting lineup? I thought that if they were going to take somebody out, that it should have been Elliot Cadeau. And I mean, hell, you could still make that argument, honestly. If you really wanted to, I still think after last night, I know, 8 points, 6 assists, he still turned the ball over 4 times. And he still had a couple of really egregious turnovers that left us scratching our heads. But I'm going to tell you right now, if Seth Trimble's going to play like that off the bench, then he's going to be perfectly fine. And again, people are going to say that, being a starter is so incredibly important. Guys, look at the amount of minutes that guys played last night. Trimble, non-starter, played 26 minutes. Ian Jackson, non-starter, played 21 minutes. Jalen Washington played 17 minutes, and he probably would have played more and probably would have been right there with Vin Allen Lubin, or Lubin would have, taken the minutes away at the end of the game when they played James Brown. It was a blowout. They weren't keeping those guys in. I think that what you said is 100% correct. They feel like a much deeper team. In hindsight, are they a deeper team? No, it's the same group of guys. It's 8 guys. We know these are the guys that are going to play, but it just gives you a different feel. And the size on the floor is just way too much to ignore, because you saw just how much better Carolina was rebounding the basketball. And yeah, there are going to be much better rebounding teams that you're going to face. Man, State is one of the worst rebounding teams in this conference. But again, I go back to the fact that in that first game, State rebounded the ball incredibly well against you, especially early on. And in this game, they could not get a rebound to save their life. You had 14 offensive rebounds in this game. That is an outstanding number. And so hopefully, with this lineup being kept together, which I would expect that this will be the starting lineup until it's proven that it is not effective, then, Carolina, I think, is going to be able to compete a little bit better on the glass right out of the gate, which is important, because you go back and it's not just the State game, the first one that points to this. I mean, you go back to that game against Clemson, man. How good of a start does Carolina get off to if they can actually pull down defensive rebounds in that game? Because that was the biggest issue, was that Clemson was just kicking your rear end on the glass offensively, and they were finishing their second chance opportunities. So, yeah, I think this lineup has to be the one that you roll with. The only change that I can understand, if they make it moving forward, is if Elliot Cadeau continues to turn the ball over and they say, look, we need you to come off the bench. We have to limit the minutes that you're playing because we can't afford to have you out there early in the game turning the ball over and putting us behind.
Yeah, and look, I still think there's a conversation there to be had. I think really at this rate, why Cadeau has stayed in the lineup is you're just trying to keep him mentally intact and engaged. Because I do think you're starting to see as much accountability for the turnovers as you've seen all year long. I mean, yeah, he had 4 more fouls again last night, but only played 23 minutes. I think in back-to-back games now, you've seen Cadeau commit an egregious turnover, and he gets taken out of the game. That stuff wasn't happening the first 2.5, 3 months of the year, which led to me coming on here and yelling. Because it was coaching malpractice. And it's why he's still having these issues as we sit here in middle to late February. But, nonetheless, yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be Carolina's 5 moving forward. And Trimble, there was some rumors flying around earlier this week that he's expected to enter the portal once again and transfer out of the program. then you see him come off the bench, and that really doesn't help the matters. But I could make the case that he was the best player on the floor last night for Carolina. Had 15 points, was 6 of 9 from the field, 3 of 4 from the foul line, 7 rebounds in 26 minutes. And I thought his defensive pressure was relentless. And it was, it really put a stranglehold on what NC State tried to do in the half court. And then when he picked the ball up in with the full court press, he, as much as anybody, made life hard for them to advance the ball across the timeline. So you're right that you're still playing the same 8 guys. So in reality, are you deeper? That answer is no. But the impact of the guys that are coming off the bench is a higher level of impactfulness than what you had when Trimble and Jackson were in the starting lineup, as opposed to where they are now coming off the bench. You have a little bit more of a scoring punch. You have guys that can come in and can change the game. And not to say that Drake Powell can't do that, but it's not to the same level as when these two guys enter the game and they can change the game with what Carolina can do offensively and then what they can do defensively. The second key, or the second takeaway we got to talk about, is that defense. And how about Hubert Davis? After a lot of talk and a lot of, I've thought about doing this, I've thought about doing that, he finally did it. It got to a point where he did not feel that NC State could advance the ball if they picked the ball up, if they picked up pressure in the half court. And lo and behold, he was right. I think State turned it over 3 times in 4 possessions. That led to 3 buckets for Carolina and effectively blew the game open, and Carolina was on their way. And it was what we've asked for all year long. It wasn't right out of the gate. It wasn't, let's wait till we're behind 10-12. It was, we made 2 free throws. We're going to pick up full court. Well, we made we made a jump shot. Let's pick up full court. We're coming out of a timeout. We're going to pick up full court. And what John Crispin talked a lot about in the Syracuse game, and Jay Billis kind of talked about it again last night on the broadcast. It gets Carolina playing at their pace. It gets Carolina playing at the tempo that they want to play at. And as we've seen, man, when Carolina is truly running and gunning, how many teams in this league can stay up with them? There aren't many teams that are built for it. How many times last night did Carolina score 4 seconds into the shot clock as they advanced the ball up that quickly, off a make, off a miss, or off a turnover? And so, look, State shot 46% from the field. They were 24 or 33% from behind the 3-point line. I know they scored 47 points in the second half, but the tone was set in the first half, and that was the type of defense we've been wanting to see from this team, because we haven't seen that since early to mid-January.
Yeah, and look, it certainly helps that State is just not a good shooting team. I mean, that's very obvious from what we've seen from watching them now twice against Carolina. But I do think that Carolina was in much better positions in the half court last night. They were guarding a lot harder than they have in some of the other games that we've seen this season. But the turnovers, that's the thing. It's very similar to football. If you're a group that cannot guard all that well, that leave guys open and allow some of these shots to potentially fall, or as it happened last night, a lot of misses on good looks for NC State, you've got to be able to create turnovers. And especially when you're built the way that Carolina is, because Carolina is built to get up and down the floor. We said that coming into the year, and it is rang true. When Carolina is playing at their pace and controlling the game, they have those are the games where Carolina's looked to be their best. And 9 turnovers in the first half. You forced 3 from Trey Parker, but I mean, a bunch of very impactful guys. I mean, you forced 1 from Ben Middlebrooks, 1 from Huntley Hatfield. So even the guys inside were creating these turnovers. That's what you want to see. Everybody being active, everybody trying to get in the passing lanes. There were multiple times Carolina getting their hand on balls that didn't even turn into turnovers, but at least being where they needed to be. That's what you want to see from this group. And yeah, I love the aggressiveness getting up and down the floor when off of made baskets. That's got to be something that you do. We've seen it. Carolina It's used it at certain times this year, but I don't think they use it enough. There's certain times where that's what you should be doing off of some of these makes, especially when a team goes on a run. Hey, let's try to get a run out here. Let's see if we can get, catch these guys off guard after they've hit a big shot and maybe get a potential easy lay-in or get to the foul line. That was what they were doing last night, was they were getting the ball going and they were either, finishing inside with easy looks, or they were at least drawing the foul and getting to the foul line. And that, we've said that's when Carolina's at their best, is when they are getting to the charity stripe. I mean, they shoot 7 free throws in the first half. Wasn't a ton more in the second half, but still, RJ Davis, 4 of 4 at the line. Those were because he was being so aggressive at getting to the basket. So I love that from Carolina. And the full court press, again, I've said it since we started talking about this last year when it was so effective against Florida State, and we said we need to see this more often. You don't have to run it the whole game, especially in a game like this where you get this type of lead. But you saw early in the game when they already had State just a little bit on the ropes, we're going to throw the full court press at them and really take control of this game. And that's exactly what they did. You did it against a guy in Trey Parker who's young, who's turnover prone, and it completely threw him off. That's what you got to do moving forward, because we've seen Carolina do it so often. It results in a turnover almost every time, or a negative possession almost every time. I know that there were a couple of times against Clemson that they ran it. Clemson ends up hitting shots. Guys, it's going to happen. But it doesn't mean that you should bail on it. So I just want Hubert to be strategic with how he uses it. And if you use it like you did last night, use it early in games to sort of throw your opponent off, I think that's going to lead to the type of success that we saw in this game. Maybe not the same margin of victory, because not everybody is as bad as NC State is, who is going to probably end up missing the ACC tournament. But even if it's a close game, throw it out there for a couple of possessions after you make a bucket, and let's see how these opponents handle it. That's all we're asking.
One last takeaway before we get to the discussion topic. One of our keys to the game was building off that offensive performance at Syracuse, that focus on the perimeter shooting. Carolina's got to start shooting the 3 ball better than what they have so far this year, where they've entered the last 2 games, the 4th worst 3-point shooting team in the history of the program. 8 for 20 last night, an efficient 40% from behind the 3-point line. 5 different heels shot the 3 or made a 3-point shot. Cadeau, Davis, Jay Witt, Cade Tyson, and Ian Jackson. And Carolina goes 8 for 20 while RJ had a 1 for 8 shooting night, which really tells you how efficient and effective Carolina was. 2 things. The 1-3 that Jackson hit in the second half in front of Carolina's bench, where he kind of had to regather the dribble, and he used that jab step to create separation. I mean, filthy. That's NBA-ish right there. That's why there's still a good chance, even despite his midseason slump, he'll be in the association this time next year. The important thing to talk about here is Cade Tyson, because he made 2 of them and almost had a 30, almost made the 1 right before the half. He had 6 points in 9 minutes last night. And maybe he just got the 9 minutes he got because the game was over. And Hubert Davis knows in a 3-game and 5-day stretch, got to save some of those legs. I also don't think that it's a coincidence that Carolina is still trying to get him going, because they need him. If they're really going to hit the rest of this regular season hard and make some noise in March, I do think he's got to be a part of it, because the shooting needs to be there, because I don't know how much you can count on Jalen Withers being an efficient 3-point shooter. I just don't. He's shooting the ball well right now. I don't know how long you can expect that to last. Am I putting too much into Cade Tyson? Am I overreacting too much to Cade Tyson? Because I think those are the first 3s he's made against power conference competition this year. They were the most confident he has looked so far this year. And it felt like for the first time all year he belonged on an ACC floor. But albeit that was against a team that entered the game 16th in the conference standings.
Yeah, I think you might be reading into it just a little bit too much. He played, some decent minutes, but it was because Carolina just they didn't necessarily need they didn't need to have anybody important in the game. That's the reason that he plays 9 minutes. I think if you saw him in a more important stretch of the game and he was knocking down those shots, maybe you feel a little bit more confident. I'd love for him to be a guy that all of a sudden starts to break out a little bit. And it doesn't have to be shooting 46% from beyond the arc, which he shot last year at Belmont. That doesn't have to be it. You just want to see a guy that when they put him on the floor can stretch the floor for Carolina, because he doesn't bring anything else. He's not a good defender. We talked about pressing, the times where the press hasn't worked. Half the time it's been with Cade Tyson on the floor because he doesn't know where he needs to be. There's a lot to his game that needs to vastly improve for him to be a key part of what Carolina does. But if you can knock down that outside shot, you're a difference maker. So I don't know. Maybe you see him again if Jalen Withers starts to struggle. I would be stunned if you see him on Saturday against Virginia. He has fallen out of the rotation. Carolina just does not play him unless it's in games like this. So I think you might be reading a little bit too much into it. But in terms of just the overall three-point shooting, I think, you like that you're starting to see a little bit of life. And if you can get 8 threes a game, make that more consistent, I feel like you can feel good with that number. You're not going to get the 13 that you hit against Syracuse. That's not going to be a consistent number. You start hitting at that rate, you're going to be one of the best teams in the entire country offensively. And there's a chance that you could make a severe run in the NCAA tournament at that rate. I would love to see it. But, if you stay in this range, even if you could bump it up to 9 a game, then you're starting to feel real confident. And I feel like that's something Carolina can accomplish because you said it. RJ Davis, 1 of 8 in this game. Seth Trimble, 0 of 1 from beyond the arc. So the two guys that you've looked to take most of your three-point shots this year, they weren't really that effective last night. It combined 1 for 9. But Ian Jackson knocking down those outside shots, that's key, man. Yeah, you want to see him hitting all sorts of shots, but when he has the 3 ball going, that's when you know he's playing well. When Jalen Withers is able to knock down shots, that's huge for Carolina from the outside. You need that 4 guy that's going to be able to stretch the floor. And if he's going to continue to start, then he has to be able to knock those shots down from the outside. So to me, that's kind of where I look. I look at Ian Jackson and Jalen Withers in this game and say, man, they did it for a second straight game. Now you're starting to feel a little bit more confident that this is something that they could be able to do for you, at least down the stretch of the regular season. Don't know if it carries over into the ACC tournament, ultimately if Carolina makes it into the NCAA tournament. But the goal right now is to get to the NCAA tournament. So hopefully this is a sign that these guys are starting to find a little bit of a rhythm from out there. And the fact that Carolina plays as often as they do here in the next few days, I think that's very encouraging as well, and hopefully allows these guys to stay in the rhythm that it seems like they're starting to get into.
All right, let's get to our discussion topic here really quickly. You got to go produce here at the top of the hour. A lot of talk about turning the corner, believing in this team. Is Carolina going to do what they got to do to make the tournament? We talked about it this morning on our show. Not a lot of Carolina fans were willing to kind of step up to the plate and say, nah, this team has bought me, or this team has got my attention. I'm bought in. I'm re-energized. Let's go do this thing. I'll put it to you like this. Am I 100% in? No. Saturday, you got to do it. You do it for 3 straight games. then I'll be there.
Let's negotiate. Yeah.
I'm flirting though with this team. I'm starting to crush on this team because they're finally playing to the talent. They're finally playing. They're still playing the way they're capable of playing, despite how flawed this roster is. And so I hope that they do. I hope they do enough to win me over. It's like the girl that you want, but she has you on the fence, and then she does the thing that either makes you fall head over heels in love with her, or you go, yeah, maybe she's not the one for me. You go somewhere else.
Feels like a personal situation for you or something.
And I mean, well, no, I'm already head over heels, but I got to make her feel the same way.
That's
which
good.
hopefully I'm getting there. I guess I'll find out at some point. I want to fall for this team. Like, and I know that might sound weird because, well, Josh, you've yelled and screamed and kicked and thrown and you've whined and complained. I've done all of that and more. It's been a rough year for me with this team. But guys, this is my favorite team in sports. This is a team that makes me love sports. It's why I have the career that I have, so I can sit here and talk about this team. I want to get to where I was last year, where, man, last year I genuinely loved that team. Man, like Cupid, Cupid showed up and shot me right in the heart with an arrow, and I was head over heels in love. That hasn't been the case this year, but I want to get there, and I think we're trending in the right direction. You go lose on Saturday, then I'll probably never believe in love again, and I'll be yelling and screaming. But you come out on Saturday and you beat a bad Virginia team and you control that game for 40 minutes and you're diving on the floor for loose balls and you're competing your tail off for from start to finish, and you're doing all the little things that don't show up in the box score but add up in the win column, then yeah, I'll be on here Saturday declaring this team's going to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that's the key to me is you've got to get Saturday. If you get Saturday, I feel like then you can start to have the conversation. And it's how they look, too. They can't come out and play a game and it's in the 50s or, God forbid, the 40s. And we're sitting here saying, yeah, oh, yeah, Carolina's an NCAA tournament team. If they can find a way at home to do what they've done the last two games, because I agree with you. The game against Syracuse, you controlled it. The reason why it's frustrating is that you were never able to put them away. This game against Virginia, I mean, look, they are playing much better. I don't know if Ron Sanchez heard what I said about him, called him one of the worst coaches in power conference basketball, which, at the time it was justified with how bad they were playing this year and how bad he was as a coach at Charlotte. That team sort of turned it around a little bit. And I know that they weren't able to keep up with Duke. Man, Duke is beating teams in this conference by an average of 20.2 points per game. It's wild what they're doing. So I don't know how much you can really read into that. I think that this is one of those games, though, that's the measuring stick. Because you look, this is the second toughest game that Carolina has to play. I would say yes, because I think there's no question going on the road to Florida State's tougher. And I don't think there's anybody else that really competes with Virginia that remains on your schedule. So, yeah, I think this is probably the second toughest test remaining. You do similar stuff to what you did in this game. Doesn't have to be the same result, but you show that same level of hustle. The effectiveness of starting a bigger lineup continues to show. You show, that improvement on the defensive end, or at least that willingness on the defensive end that leads to some missed shots, creates some turnovers. Then we can start having the conversation, because I think that you do have to look at the fact that NC State is pretty freaking bad, man. But I will say that the one thing that is a little bit different, and the reason why you should maybe be looking in that direction, maybe start feeling like, hey, I may be in full-on crush mode here soon, is because, remember, the team that State just beat, Boston College, you should have lost that game at home. It was the same situation. it was a really good crowd for that game. We were there in attendance for that game. There were a lot of people there. It was a pretty good crowd. And you still almost found a way to lose that game to that team. This game, you dominated and controlled. So maybe they have turned that corner, but I'm with you. You got to show me on Saturday before I can actually believe and say, you know what? This team's got me. I'm hooked now. Now I think they can do some special things.
Well, that's going to wrap up this edition of the
game balls.
Oh, crap. Yeah, I forgot we're going to hand out game balls. I'll go first here really quickly.
Okay.
Everyone's probably going to think I'm going to go with RJ because he led the team in scoring. And that's a reasonable guy for me to go to. It's my favorite guy on the team currently. I'll go with Seth Trimble. Gets moved to the bench, responds 15.7 rebound performance in 26 minutes. I thought for all intents and purposes, he was the best player on the floor last night for either team. I thought his energy was contagious when he came off the bench. We loved the moment with Dontrez Styles. He just basically looked at him and said, "You transferred for this? You transferred to go get your butt kicked? All right, cool." But it could have been easy for Trimble to sit there and pout and whine and be woe is me because he lost his starting role again. It's not what he did. He did what you expect the Carolina guy to do. He helped this team win. And he played a beautiful game last night. So RJ may have been the lead candidate because he led the team in scoring. My game ball, though, it goes to Seth Trimble.
I'm not even going to go with RJ because I think that Vin Allen Lubin deserves a shout out here. You look at the way that he played in the second half of this game. First half, doesn't even score. Second half, 13 points. He was 5 of 7 from the field in that second half. 3 of 3 from the foul line, which is huge for him too. Not a great free throw shooter. And he pulls down 3 rebounds in the second half. You know the thing that's amazing? All 3 of those rebounds were on the offensive end of the floor. This is what you brought Vin Allen Lubin here to do. And he may not have been as effective in the first half. That's fine, man. Jalen Washington was effective in the first half. But in the second half, when Carolina needed him, because you don't have him to start out that second half playing the way that he does, that's a close game. Carolina's in a battle because State came out, was shooting the ball well in that second half. That was where Hubert Davis was getting frustrated. But Vin Allen Lubin was the guy that was stepping up. He was the one that was scoring to keep you in a comfortable position. So I think for that reason, that's why I have to give him my game ball, because you needed somebody to step up there and carry you offensively when it seemed like the rest of the team went into just a little bit of an offensive lull. He did not. He controlled the game for you, and that's why I give him my game ball.
Yeah, one last thing I'll mention before we do get out of here. I thought what he did a much better job of doing in the second half. Same thing from Jalen Washington, and you heard me talk about this while we were watching the game on the phone. I actually had like a mini I freaked out about it because if Washington made himself a target, he would have got a dunk. I thought they did a much better job in the pick and roll game playing with their body and becoming a target for the ball to get to them, and then they can make a play with their hand. They can make a play at the rim. So many times, man, they've set screens, and that's all they've done. They haven't rolled and became a passing target. They haven't been a threat to score. Well, when you start doing that, all of a sudden now they got to guard that action. If the 2 guys crash with the screener, now you got an open look from 3, or they're going to crash, and you got a dump down pass for a dunk. And that's what happened, I thought, in the second half. It's been an up and down year for that front court, but they played really well last night, and they'll need to continue to play well as Carolina navigates the rest of their regular season schedule. Well, with that, guys, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Four Corners Podcast. In the meantime, we encourage you to visit the website, HeelToughBlog.com. The recap of the game was already posted for you guys if you want to go a little bit more in depth about Carolina's win over NC State. Anthony has you covered with some recruiting notes as well for Bill Belichick and Carolina football. I'll be back on Saturday getting you ready for the game against Virginia. Game preview will go up the day of. And, of course, the recap will soon follow the game on Saturday afternoon. We just want you to visit the website every single morning, afternoon, or evening for the latest and the best Carolina basketball, Tar Heel football coverage. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast. It will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball season. But with that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank all of you for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.